Welcome everybody back to the next webinar in the Ekahau series. This time we'll be talking about ensuring wireless connectivity in those mission critical deployments, right? And a couple key things to emphasize here is one, we're talking about wireless, right? And some people, if all you look at is Wi-Fi, as the saying goes, if all you use is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Right, so we're going to be branching outside the domain of Wi-Fi, looking at other wireless technologies and how they complement each other, how they can be used, how we can analyze their performance. And we'll also be focusing on mission critical deployments, right? It's one of those terms that depending on what vertical, what type of business environment you're working on, mission critical can mean different things. In some environments, mission critical literally is saving people's lives. Other environments, you have travelers rushing through airports. They're in a hurry. If they don't get that critical announcement of a gate change, that could cause them to miss their flight, right? So a lot of important communications happen there. Or if you happen to be at a stadium, right? Some modern stadiums, as part of the uh, drive to increase the fan experience, they'll have live auctions during the event where you can bid on a signed jersey during a break or an intermission. And if there's too much delay or too much latency and you fail to make that bid and you miss out on winning that prize jersey, that could be a significant downside of your day, right? So those are some of the wireless highlights and the mission critical kind of concepts to frame our discussion around today as we jump into this webinar.
Thanks, Troy. And a quick round of introductions. Myself and Troy, we are both doing product marketing and ECSE here at Ekahau, and we have the fabulous Dale Tyler also with us from Ekahau, who looks after sales engineering and will be responding to you in the chat and in the Q&A as well. So do please put your questions into there. But the real star of the show today is Derek Peterson, who is the CTO of Boingo Wireless, and we are really fortunate to have Derek back with us because if you was with us going back a few months when we did our Wi-Fi day, Derek joined us then, and we had such amazing feedback from the audience that they would really like to see Derek go into a bit more detail and explain a little bit more about his expertise when it comes to wireless. So we're really fortunate to have you here today, Derek. So thank you very much for your time today. And yeah, maybe just want to say a quick hello.
Hey, thanks. Good to be here, everyone. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, no, the feedback and I know that the anticipation from our audience has been really excited for this one.
Yeah, again, thank you, Derek, for being able to join us on this call. Very excited, very keen to hear what you have to say. But before we get to that, I just want to highlight the Ookla brand, which is an amalgamation of four brands, bringing them together under one common umbrella, helping us deliver better connectivity for all. And to make that happen, we use four different products that are available to businesses, organizations, as well as individuals to collect data and basically fill that data pool so that we can analyze that information. So we have products that you're probably all familiar with, the speed test tool that can run on your mobile device, that you can launch a test from anywhere, any location, whether it be a stadium, an auditorium, or even from your home network. Depending on the applications that you're trying to access, Down Detector helps you determine is a service provider issue that's preventing you from getting connectivity to your end resources? Is it a particular social media website or a regional outage that you may be having to resolve or work around? Then we have at least one of my favorite tools is the Ekahau product portfolio suite, which allows you to design better, more efficient, and optimized Wi-Fi networks while making sure that it's all secure at the same time. And then lastly, root metrics. With all the data that we can collect, it's very handy, very insightful to be able to score and categorize the performance of different networks that we see across different regions. So there's an umbrella of the different terms or different logos that we have. I've talked about data a little bit already, right? And in today's world, we live with access to a tremendous amount of data, right? Now, not all data is equal, right? In order to make useful insights and to make sense of that data that we collect, it's very important that we have trusted data, data that's collected under known circumstances, known conditions that we can baseline and reference. It's also very insightful to collect data from different sources, allowing us to trust and validate the data that we're collecting to making sure that it's accurate or view things from a different perspective. And with all that rich data, we can then make better insights into what's happening on our network, what the experience of our users are going through, if they're able to make those bids on that jersey. They feel that they got a fair shot on making those bids, and that they didn't miss out on that winning opportunity to get their favorite sports players signed outfits, right? And ultimately, at the end of all those insights, we can deliver better outcomes for those users, right? Throw in additional applications, push more tools, more ways that users can access the data they're looking for, and create a better experience for users at auditoriums or people moving in and out of airports as they experience their travels.
So, like Troy, Ekahau is one of my favorite products too. And I know we've got quite a lot of new people on the webinar today. So if you're not familiar what Ekahau does, we provide you the software and hardware to allow you to design a new Wi-Fi network, redesign an existing Wi-Fi network, measure your wireless networks by using our hardware device called the Psychic 2, which scans everything in Wi-Fi across 2.45 and 6 gigahertz. And once you have that survey data, you can then use it to optimize your existing Wi-Fi, so improve the performance of your network just based on radio level configurations. And when you're at the point where you need to upgrade to a new Wi-Fi network, you can also use that data to design and redesign a new network. And then ultimately, we want you to not only have a really great performing Wi-Fi network, so designed really well, installed well, optimized, running great, but we want to help you keep it as secure as possible. So we make it nice and easy for you to find things like rogue devices, non-Wi-Fi interference, or even any of your networks that might not be configured in the most optimal, secure way. So you can keep your networks running really well, but also nice and secure too.
Right. And I also want to call out attention to another tool, another arrow that's available in the quiver, so to speak. We have the cell analytics tool. And I was just looking at the chat there, so I do apologize. I guess there was a slight echo, so I've switched microphones, so my apologies about that. With cell analytics, it allows wireless designers and integrators to collect billions of sample points across their locations, right? This can be used to test very lots of different devices, collect data on an ongoing basis, getting all those data points, which allows for future growth and forecasting. So you can plan which areas of your location need specific attention, which ones might be underserving, just due to the nature of how people move throughout that facility. They may be sitting or congregating in higher concentrations or certain areas, but it gives you that model that you can then make future plans to get the best bang for your dollar, to increase that ROI and make sure that you're not just expanding coverage everywhere unnecessarily, and focus on the spots that need to hit, right? And we can do that by collecting massive amounts of trusted data, making those insights, and then delivering on deployments that can be impactful to those users.
Yeah. So before we hand the microphone over to Derek, we're going to play a quick video case study, which I think will set the scene nicely. So whilst I bring that up for everybody, and here
And
we...
so some of you may notice in the background, some of those mountains may look a little bit familiar. If you've ever attended or had the privilege of attending the Wireless LAN Professionals Conference, which has been regularly hosted in Phoenix, that may be why some of those mountains in the background look familiar to you, which is a good intro or segue into this video clip that Matt's about to play for us.
There's one thing that we all travel with here at the airport. One of these things. Here at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, they know what it takes to keep these things connected so that your email works, your boarding pass works, and yes, you can even download your favorite binge-worthy show right before boarding your flight. At Ookla, we know a thing or two about great airport connectivity. Every day, we capture millions of consumer-initiated speed test results, enabling us to identify the world's top-performing networks and deliver valuable connectivity insights to network operators. Phoenix is consistently one of the world's fastest airports for Wi-Fi, and it's all thanks to their consistent innovation and working with their partner Boingo Wireless. Mike, can you tell me a little bit more about what goes into a great wireless network?
There's three things we think are really important. and passengers think are important. One, they want to have their service be very fast. Two, they want to be able to get on really quick. And the third thing is they want it to be a secure network. It's created a great experience here for the airport and for Davos.
That's exactly right, Mike. We view digital connectivity is not simply to connect our passengers, but it is an essential enabler for our airport ecosystem. Last year, we served more than 52 million passengers. That's the busiest we've ever been. We recognize and acknowledge that we just didn't need to solve the speed challenge for our customers. We also needed to address the capacity issue. That's what drove our strategic decision to transition to a Wi-Fi 6 technology in partnership with Boingo.
We pioneered a technology called Passpoint a number of years ago, which enables passengers to be able to get on quickly, securely, so that they can get right to their business at the airport.
And it certainly is fast. We actually see at Ookla speed test results, over Wi-Fi downloads 150 megabits per second, and for mobile networks 300 megabits per second. So Dava, tell me what role Wi-Fi plays in connecting passengers.
It plays a huge role. For a lot of those international travelers, Wi-Fi is an essential service. Our goal here at Sky Harbor is for our passengers to not only think about us just as America's friendliest airport, but also the airport with the most reliable and the fastest Wi-Fi experience.
What we see everywhere around the airport is people on their phones. But Mike, what don't we see?
What you don't see, which makes all this work, is what we call a NOC, a Network Operations Center. Open 7 days a week, fully staffed, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, making sure the network's up and running, or if we're identifying issues, we can fix them before something happens.
Huge congratulations to you both on the fantastic internet speeds.
Ookla's been a great partner, and we've worked together for a long time, and we're using cell analytics for usage patterns and things like that in the cellular network. And then we're also using Ekahau, which helps us design, manage, and optimize our Wi-Fi networks.
Yeah, the Ekahau Psychic 2 is particularly valuable in complex RF environments like this for Wi-Fi measurements. Can you tell us why it is so essential here?
Sidekick 2 really provides us the orchestration of these major facilities and very complex facilities, which we love at Boingo. But the Sidekick 2 really helps us measure signal strength. It helps us identify interference. And then it also helps us validate the network design, which when you have all of those working together and you know when the Ookla speed test comes out, you know you're going to have a great experience.
I hope you enjoyed seeing what it takes for one of the world's best airports to have one of the world's fastest Wi-Fi. That's all for today. See you again next time.
That was fun, right? A lot of fun.
That was great fun. I'm sure everyone in the chat will agree that was a Oscar-worthy performance. Not by myself, but by Mike and David. They did a great job. So no, that was really good fun to be able to get to do that combined case study together with you guys, Derek, as well. So let me go ahead and share my screen again so I can bring up your slides for you.
Yeah, sounds great. You know, I just say, you know, it's great to do that project, and you know, it's nice for you guys to reach out. You know, we've been working with Ekahau for years, forever, and then also looking at you know, what we've seen with these airports with your data analytics over the years, and your methodology for doing what you do, gathering the data, has always been a great feed into what we're doing with gathering the network data. You know, we have probes and network data, but it's so nice to be able to also see real customer insights from the stuff you guys do. So it was fun to partner with you on that. So I just say thanks for that. It was, we really had fun. It was also, you know, it's a lot of people don't know about your cell analytics tool. I mean, I use it probably I don't know, at least weekly, if not daily sometimes. It's really powerful to just kind of see when you put in a new network and focus in on an area or on a building and say, oh, okay, you can look over time and see how the change has happened of the network. So it's another great tool that I didn't realize, because I've seen that video like probably 10 times in the last probably month and a half. But I didn't realize you had that section in there, because even at the WBA meeting today, they kind of stopped at that part, and it was a different slice of it. So you didn't get to see that. So that was good to see. So for those of you who don't use that tool, it's another great tool that's available to you, is that cell analytics tool. It's really awesome to be able to see changes over time and and looking at a building and seeing different sections of a building. And especially when you're doing large buildings up and down, you can see like certain floors that are good and certain floors that aren't. And then it lets you go talk to, you know, different venues and say, hey, why don't I help you up here? Because this part of your building's not good. And you can, you know, kind of expand your business when you're inside maybe one part of a building and you want to move to other parts. So it's great. All
And
right.
I
So anyhow, I think the key thing is, like I said, with that I was going to try to share today was talking about, you know, the power of that independent data and the insights that you get from it, because we all have a lot of data that we get from our networks and from probes and from other things, but having that independent data sources is key. So if you can go ahead and go to the next slide, I'll kind of run you through a little bit. You know, Mike talked about on the video, the things that customers really understand is speed. So, you know, obviously we all know that latency, jitter, other things really factor in as well. And with some of the new data that you can get from Ekahau, when you partner with them to get those data insights, you're getting the jitter, you're getting the speed. They're running a test on different applications and how those applications will perform. That's very powerful to be able to see all that. You know, our customers want understand speed, but obviously it's really about that whole experience. And so trying to understand and be able to do that is key. Another key thing is security. We've all talked about it for a long time. You know, a lot of our networks, when you go to that airport at Phoenix, you can connect utilizing the open network. And so you don't have that security. But of course, if you use Passpoint, so if you use one of our Passpoint providers, you can end up having a secure network. So you're basically getting a certificate that you have that you share. And so it's just like a SIM certificate. And so you don't have, everybody's encryption is different. You know, a lot of offices still to this day, are using WPA3, a shared, key. And then by being able to do Passpoint in offices, which is a passion of mine, and other locations, like if you're running other locations, I think it's important to kind of keep driving that forward and improving security by having and taking advantage of Passpoint or open roaming, which is the new thing that sits on top of Passpoint. So in our venues, we try to push that. I think in Phoenix is a good example. A lot of these airports, what you'll find is the carriers will end up utilizing their SIM credentials to connect, and they will get you'll get a secure connection. So you don't have to worry about a VPN and shared secret keys or man-in-the-middle attacks. So something I just think, hopefully we're all just trying to push forward towards. And I would say something close to 60-70% of the connections at the airport are Passpoint enabled connections, and trying to continue that and move that forward is important. And then ease of use is also key for us when we're building out networks. We want it to be quick and easy to get in and be able to use the service. Done a lot of work with the standards groups and fixing the captive portal challenges. What you'll find is a lot of people haven't looked at that standard. It was produced, I think, last year, and then Chrome and Safari have now put in some additional features in their browsers to be able to support and make that ease of use work better with captive portal. So if you haven't read that latest document, you should look at that. There's some changes you need to make the website to make it work. So between that and Passpoint, I think you get some really good ease of use. And so that's on that. And some of the key things in getting that connectivity. The next thing I wanted to talk about and kind of share was this idea of that independent third-party data. We have, of course, a lot of data. I think I shared last time we put in back in 2012, I was working and realized that I didn't have all the data that I needed in our networks. And so we ended up creating that VIA server. I think I shared with you, it was like a virtual infrastructure appliance. It's very simple. I was just like, hey, there's different things I want to run on the edge. And so I need to have a server that I can put stuff on. And prior to that, we had a lot of different types of gateways and DHCP servers and other network applications, and also other business applications like caching or speed tests. We had different speed tests that we built, and then we actually even used some of the Ookla speed test software that you could put directly on the server, sitting there with your gateway. And you'd be running these tests. So you had the server, and a big point of that, part of that server that we established was a DPI engine that pulls out every packet and then lets us look at each packet to try to understand how each service's quality is. And so we have lots of data. Unfortunately, sometimes when you have a lot of data, you don't have a lot of insights. And so you've got to work through with the data engineers to develop those insights. And so working to develop those insights was very important for us. And then relying and working and partnering with Ookla and understanding what they were doing with things like cell analytics and with Ekahau and the pattern that you could get out of their system and feed into the network. So you could actually look not only from their tools, but on the network side, as you're starting to use those pattern recognitions of their tools, you could end up really providing a better network solution. So you could see things like where traffic is spiking, where there's drop-offs, how many devices are moving. Movement is important. One of the things that was talked about yesterday is this challenge of now where you have MIMO patterns and then you have people moving. And so you're trying to do a MIMO feed to an individual as they're walking. And so it ends up causing worse behavior on your network, right? So you're walking through an airport and you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to turn on MIMO and have multiple connections per device, but they're moving. And so as you're trying to establish that multiple connections per device, you're actually causing yourself more interference and actually a worse experience. So sometimes you got to go, well, this is an area where there's a lot more movement. So maybe, I've got to adjust my networks a little bit for that. And so in that certain area, because it's a very highly trafficked area with a lot of movement, and, a long hallway, for example, in an airport. And so thinking through those kind of things and having that data and then recognizing, by them doing speed tests or these other measures is very powerful to it really just understand what's going on. I've got a lot of other things listed on this slide. I think, I'm sure people might have questions about it, but all these measures that you're seeing on here are key to understanding and building that better network, and then creating an environment that keeps people secure, easy, and gets them the best speed and experience that they might want to have. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. Seems like everybody, I don't want to be a talking head here, but I'll keep going a little bit until I start seeing some questions pop up. When I look at what we did at Phoenix, just to kind of give you an idea of what's going on at Phoenix, we focused in on Phoenix, and they were one of the first Wi-Fi 6. Obviously, we're up to Wi-Fi 7 now. We're getting a lot of Wi-Fi 7 deployments. I think we were one of the first ones to launch it in Vegas a few months ago. At least that's what we say. And then we've got other airports where we're launching Wi-Fi 7 in stadiums and so on. But the key thing is at Phoenix, when we worked with Daver and his team, we were trying to find the best way to be able to create for them a couple years ago a great network, but then not just focusing only on the Wi-Fi network with Wi-Fi 6, but also in helping them try to understand how they could rebuild and create a network for cellular too. So with all the carriers in the US supporting a DAS network. So we wanted to think through that. And so we ended up utilizing Ookla cell analytics. And what we noticed really quick when we started that project was that there was areas that were not even covered by the DAS network. The Wi-Fi network, we did a really good design with the Ekahau system, so we knew where we needed to be. But on the DAS network side, it was a network for DAS that was run by somebody else. And so then Dabber kind of brought us in utilizing our tools to evaluate somebody else's DAS network. And so that's why you saw in that video, both the DAS ended up improving in speeds, the cellular network, as well as the Wi-Fi network. And then what we were able to do was recognize areas where the Wi-Fi was strong and where the DAS maybe didn't need to be as strong and adjust accordingly. So in the areas where you're going to have a lot of people on the DAS network, you were able to focus in on those areas for the DAS. But in like back of house areas where you're like going, okay, I don't have as many people. They can connect to their Wi-Fi, their operational staff. Let's really make sure the Wi-Fi network's good out in that area. So thinking it the network through as like that whole solution was a key part of that, and we were able to do that with utilizing some of those tools that are available to us. So we upgraded that. As you saw, we're getting speeds really good at 152 megs. We're using that DPI engine to do certain things like this dynamic shifting of the network. 400, I think I shared this last time, 400 people coming off an airplane. You have 300 people waiting to get back on that airplane and 400 people waiting to get on that airplane. They're walking through, they're turning on their phones, their Wi-Fi is automatically connecting. How do you end up managing it so that as they're connecting and they're walking through, they're not interrupting somebody who's trying to download that video right before they get on the plane. And so we do with our DPI engine, we're able to see that kind of traffic around a gate area. Maybe there's 2 or 3 APs around that gate area, and we'll adapt and do some dynamics prioritization, I guess is what you can call it, where we'll say, okay, the downloads, I want them to keep going at full speed, but all the background traffic, like somebody's trying to up all their devices and all their apps on their phone are trying to connect and do something, we kind of throttle those or deprioritize those because they're not something that they want to do. But Uber and their Outlook, as they get off and their texts, they should go fast. So that prioritization, automatic prioritization, dynamic prioritization is a key component to kind of make sure that those kind of changes, brief changes that are going on in the network are accounted for. So very
Derek,
important. Yeah,
I
please.
just wanted to, I just wanted to actually quantify to everybody like how good the average speed of 150 megabits per second over Wi-Fi actually is, because um, the way that the network is deployed and configured, like that is the typical best speed that you can actually achieve with one of your devices. So the way the network was configured there is that you guys are leveraging 20 megahertz wide channels, which makes sense because it's a really busy airport, lots of access points, lots of Wi-Fi, lots of RF around you. So if you're using a 20 megahertz wide channel and you've got, let's say, a Wi-Fi 6 client device that is typically 2 spatial streams, the average like data rate that you're likely to achieve for that is going to be around like 150 megabits per second is like literally probably the best throughput that you can achieve for a device on that configuration for a high density deployment. So people might think, oh, 150 megabits per second, that doesn't seem like it's that fast, but actually it's the best that you can get for a real high density deployment. Yes, if you had wider channels, you could get potentially faster data rates and higher download speeds, but then you would have a trade-off for the performance of the network. And I can say from my own experience, for the longest time I've ever spent at an airport, which was when I was at this airport because I got there early to do the filming, and my flight wasn't until much later on in the evening. My connection was flawless throughout. I had great coverage everywhere I went because I did explore lots of the airport that I normally wouldn't have perhaps got to. And I was there all day, didn't have any issues, connected, like you said, with the captive portal, no problem at all. And I had great speeds everywhere. So yeah, I just wanted to just chime in a little bit about how good that result actually is. It's the best possible you could have got for the configuration deployment of this network.
Yeah. And Matt, that one of the things to point out, we say that there's a Boingo Wi-Fi 6 network there. We never turned on 6 gigahertz yet. And that's another thing that I don't know if you noticed, but we are running those smaller channels. We're changing that. So this year's our push to go ahead and do the 6 gigahertz networks we've been deploying Wi-Fi 6E capable devices, but we were like, okay, there's not that many devices, and it's kind of confusing. And then we also have to recognize that they have to be WPA3 instead of WPA2. And we had a lot of legacy devices that were WPA2 in Phoenix and in some of the other locations where we deploy. So now we're launching, and you should see in the next few weeks and months, all these airports now have two SSIDs. One pass point will automatically be a WPA3 because it has to be, as well as Wi-Fi 5 and 6 gigahertz channels available, so that you can end up utilizing those low ones, but you can also take advantage of 6. And then we're going to up the channels width to 40 in a lot of cases, and in most cases, and 80 in other cases, depending on where you're at, because we have those extra 1200 megahertz available to deploy. So that's going to be awesome. You're going to see speeds, I think, in our locations. They're going to go significantly higher, especially if you're on a newer device, because you'll be able to take advantage of that. And then we'll still have, for all those legacy devices, the Boingo standard connections. So the open one will be 2, 4, and 5. And it will support 2, 4, and 5 for that shifting that you need to have. But that's something that it's good that you brought up, because we're all in that phase where we're trying to figure out the best way to deploy this, because not all devices can do 6, and then not all people are successful with WPA3 on some of these older legacy devices. So that's kind of how we decided to do it. And I think I'm looking forward to the next analytics thing that you'll run, hopefully by the end of this year, because I think it comes out in September or October. I can't remember, but I'm guessing it's about then when you guys are going to be ready, and you're going to hopefully see in a lot of these airports and a lot of these stadiums and other locations we do, you're going to see the advantage that you're going to get from 6 gigahertz. Okay, next slide, please. So a little bit about Boingo. So we've been talking a lot about the airports. We're in a lot of airports. I think people know us for the airports because we used to, it used to be our business back in 2000. It's kind of crazy. We've been doing Wi-Fi in buildings since 1999. But we've really kind of changed. We have 3 business lines now. So we have an enterprise business line that focuses on large buildings under 500 square meters. So you're thinking about office buildings, MDUs, so multi-dwelling units, apartments, hotels. That's an enterprise business. We were in that business years ago, kind of stepped out of it for a while because they weren't developing Wi-Fi the way we wanted to. They'd put a Wi-Fi access point in every room and then say good luck, and then you'd walk in the hallway or go downstairs and you didn't have coverage, and we just felt that was wrong. So we tried to go in and change the model to think about designing Wi-Fi for the whole building, and then doing virtual dynamic networks, so that as you go downstairs to do your laundry, you're still connected to your network up in your apartment, and you can print and everything else in your own network. Technology was coming out, it's there now. And so we're deploying MDUs in that kind of fashion now, and it's kind of exciting. And that's the enterprise side. So we're hoping to be able to kind of keep pushing that forward. When we deploy those networks, we're also deploying a cellular coverage network, which is, we call it like a cheap DAS. And then we're also deploying ERCs for emergency radio and response services. So that's a kind of a fun group, enterprise group we started a couple years ago, that's really blowing up. We've got our large networks that we do for carriers, stadiums, airports, hospitals, larger hospitals. They might fall into either one of these. If it's an urgent care, it might be a small one. And we're finding in hospitals, it's about securing those devices, because there's a lot of hospital devices that are on the network. And so making sure that you end up creating a network that provides security for those devices away from the security. So VLAN separation is important, but just as important as that, monitoring and understanding what's going on that network, so that you can, because those devices are not very secure, and a lot of times they're not built, well. They just throw in a Wi-Fi chip and say, okay, let that device work, and the ultrasound feed you data, but they're not thinking through all the security with those devices. So you kind of have to come up with tricks to support them. And then so that you got both those groups. And then, of course, I think a lot of you know that we're on military bases, over 100 military bases, where we provide, a lot of it's providing Wi-Fi to the troops. We just did Guam. So we're all around the world doing those military bases for the U.S. military, and a lot of Wi-Fi in those deployments, but also cellular deployments for those locations as well. But at the end of the day, our focus is really just to try to figure out how to solve a problem. And a lot of the times, the way you solve what people want is they want speed, they want that easy, and they want it simple. And that's what we're trying to do. And the security is obviously, I shared this the other day when I was on the stage here at the WBA, security is becoming more and more important. So, one of the guys said, hey, doesn't everybody call it a knock? My knock guy, I told him we now have a combined security and network operations center. I tried to change our knock term into a service operations center, and I was like trying to push it, and everybody was like, nobody knows what that means, a service operations center. You can't call it a service operations center. I'm happy I didn't call it a service operations center, because I would have said, oh, we have a SOC, and everybody would have thought it was a security operations center. But anyhow, I'm calling my guys, I'm saying we should call it the SNOC now, for the security and network operations center, because we're doing a lot more security operations now too. But he wants to call it the NSOC. I don't know if anybody's got a good term there, but I kind of like the SNOC idea, but it kind of sounds weird, so maybe I won't go there. Anyhow, that's Boingo. Hopefully, if you haven't used some of our locations, hopefully you have, and hopefully you've had a great experience. And if you haven't, reach out, and I'm happy to discuss with you how we can make it better. All right, knock, who's there? All right, exactly. So key part, next slide, is about Boingo.
Sorry, Derek, just
Yeah,
before we
please, Troy.
jump into the next
Yeah.
slide here, there's a lot of great data points on the slide. And one of the
No.
things that stands out to me is that you're throwing down a lot of wireless technologies, a lot of terms here. We have Wi-Fi, DAS, there's CBRS, private 5G networks. It's a whole mix of different solutions. And so at given venues, I was just wondering if you could share some of your insights into how do you come up with the right mix of offering the technologies relevant to users. Do you have to pick one, or can you combine some Wi-Fi, NAS, and private 5G all together? And then how do you separate which traffic goes over what network, or what percentage of traffic you want to ride over across each network?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So you can go to the next slide, because it leads
Ah,
into this perfectly. But let me answer you. When we've been doing DAS since '99, so it was large commercial networks for the carriers, right? And then what had typically happened in the old days was we had our Wi-Fi services, and then they wanted cellular coverage so that you could, because connecting to Wi-Fi was a pain, right? It was like, I remember in 2011, I went to Boingo, and I was a cellular guy before Boingo. I mean, I had Wi-Fi, but I wasn't like a Wi-Fi guy. And then I came to Wi-Fi, and I was like, boy, Wi-Fi is kind of a pain. This captive portal, the way you do it, they're all different. They're set up different. And you couldn't easily connect to Wi-Fi. Then Passpoint came, and I read about Passpoint. Some of you on the call probably have been working on that Passpoint longer than I have. But I was like, this solves the problem with Wi-Fi. It makes it connection and everything secure and everything. This is great. And so it was one of those things where back then you had to do it, because getting on Wi-Fi was a challenge. And so you had to have cellular networks as well. And cellular networks, the carriers were willing to pay for them indoors, so you could have a good financial model. So carrier networks and Wi-Fi networks at the beginning were kind of like, okay, yeah, you're going to have both. And that's kind of how I kind of looked at it in 2011 and 12 and till 14, when we started doing Passpoint. It was like, well, I can't rely on Wi-Fi because the connection rates on Wi-Fi were 8-9% if you were lucky in an airport. But connection rates on the cellular network were obviously a lot higher because they automatically connect. Once we put in Wi-Fi and Passpoint, our connection rate on Wi-Fi all of a sudden jumped up to like 60, 70%, like overnight in a lot of these airports in 2014. And so we realized that we were driving a better experience because they could connect to the network. One of the challenges was we did not build out the network in the hallways, right? It was only in the gate areas. And so then we'd have people automatically connecting to Wi-Fi, but it was a bad experience. So we had to go do upgrades throughout all the networks to be able to make it so that Wi-Fi would transition. And then we had to figure out how Apple did it with KVNR, and we had to figure out how Google's engine worked in switching over from access point to access point. So we were challenged there, but so we always, at the beginning back in 2014, it was always, okay, do Wi-Fi and cellular, right? Then private networks came and we realized that there were a lot of locations that we had. We had a lot of arenas that we were supporting, think Live Nation venues. They didn't have a cellular option because the carriers were like, I don't want to go put a network out there and or have you put a network out there because if I do that, there's 12 concerts a day in a year inside this arena. So why would I do that? But I still want that connectivity. And so really started in 2000, probably 12, started pushing the CBRS Alliance, the private cellular solution. And we started saying, this will help solve these locations where I can't get a carrier involvement. So that's kind of how it started in 2014. It was like 3 siloed networks. And then I've been pushing since 2014 after I finally got these 3 solutions available to me. How do I make them work together? How do I make it so that you can seamlessly coexist, but not as silos, but as a converged platform that allows everybody to connect and move from one to the other? And we're still not there. It's still one of the things I'm championing. It works pretty good from a cellular handoff to Wi-Fi, right? But going Wi-Fi back to cellular sometimes is clunky on certain devices. And then same thing with private networks. Going from a private network to Wi-Fi is pretty easy. Going back from a Wi-Fi to private network as you step out of an airport or, for example, is a little bit clunky. So there's still a lot of work to do there. I'm still pushing it in the standards groups. But so what I'm focused on is that trying to figure out how we get that coexistence to work with maybe I tried multipath quick. I tried a lot of different solutions to that with multipath stuff. When I was in the military years ago, we had all those connections. So I come from that. I remember I used to run around controlling airstrikes. I had VHF, UHF, HF, and FM. And I'd have to sit there and bounce around and they carry these huge radios to try to, control airstrikes and as a ranger guy. And I was like, this sucks. But we solved it there. And we've solved it actually in the DoD at a couple places where we could take a device that we control with the DoD, and it does allow seamless back and forth between those solutions. So we've made it work with some partners to make it work so that it actually works. The challenge is the ecosystem with the device guys. They control the engine. So unless you can get into the code, you can't really do that seamless handover because they control that. But anyhow, I think we can get there. We're pushing that in the standards. The other thing then, so the approach I'm taking now, if we look at one of the stadiums that has all 3 that we just did, one of the largest stadiums, one of the most forward-looking stadiums right now. You can walk in, you play a game as the game's going on in the basketball game. You can get food. It all interconnects. There's Wi-Fi. There's the devices that you carry that have both Wi-Fi and private network and cellular network in them. And we're able to have them manipulate and go back and forth so that they're always connected, because in certain areas, like when you go down in the bowl, it changes. That's working great in converged Wi-Fi. But in other locations, the way we're doing it, when we can't control the devices, is by use case. So we're looking at the use case. We're saying, okay, there's cameras here that I need to support. and it makes sense to have these cameras on a private network. Leave it off the Wi-Fi, keep the Wi-Fi network for these other services. But a lot of times when we're doing that, we're utilizing solutions that allow us to have a fallback for those cameras on Wi-Fi if we need to, but we're giving them a primary channel, and then we're following up with a secondary solution. So that's kind of how we're looking at it today. It's use case by use case, it's solution by solution. And so it requires a lot more discussions with the venue to discuss, okay, what are you trying to do? Okay, I have a parking garage. Okay, I could do that with Wi-Fi. Okay, or I could do that with private cellular. What else are you going to want to connect in there? Do you want them to stay on their cell phones or automatically get straight on the Wi-Fi? Can you control that? And so we're making those decisions with them, and then we're building out those networks. We're leaving enough infrastructure in there so as we look forward and convergence is actually full, it's not just converged siloed networks, but converged networks that will be able to kind of steer based on dynamic decisions like we do today, but we across those different platforms. So that's kind of how we're looking at it. Did that help?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That was great. Thank you for that explanation. Another question that popped into my head there. You mentioned you saw a significant increase in Wi-Fi adoption once Passpoint was enabled. And so related to a question that Andrew brought up in the Q&A, did you have strategies kind of prior to Passpoint towards encouraging users or giving them an incentive to get them to connect to Wi-Fi? Did those strategies work? Or are you seeing more benefit with once Passpoint's deployed out, users don't even have to think about it and they're naturally just gravitating over to a Wi-Fi network? So yes, if you just touch on what incentivizers do we have to lure users and their client devices onto the Wi-Fi? What's worked and what's presented challenges?
Yeah. It's really dependent on the venues. And since we support so many different types of venues, it's different. So like in our military business, obviously you're at home, you're used to connecting to Wi-Fi, you're stable, you're watching TV, you're playing video games, you're on your computer. The push to try to get somebody to connect onto Wi-Fi isn't as hard. But airports, nobody wants to stay in airport long. I mean, it's just the way it is. It's like get in there as right before you can, get through TSA, and then as soon as you get off the plane, you're like going, get me out of there. I mean, every once in a while you get stuck there and you're there for 2 hours and you're like, okay, I'm gonna be here for 2 hours. I'll go through the captive portal and try to get connected. But most of the time you're just like, I want to get through and get out on my plane and get out. I mean, we don't like that. It's busy, crazy stuff. So airports, we did try all kinds of stuff. We have an app. You can go download it. It's called the Boingo Wi-Finder. We've had it shoot for 20 years. We spent a lot of time on that Wi-Finder app to automatically connect to Wi-Fi. Back in the day, it was using whisper protocols to be able to talk to websites all throughout the world to get roaming and easily connect with apps. Our company Boingo started as if you remember back in the Earthlink days, Sky Dayton was our founder, and Earthlink used to have a browser adapter, like a little thing that sat inside your browser. You click the browser and it automatically connect you to dial-up Wi-Fi. Our first software that Boingo ever built, and kind of where our background is we had a little button in the browser to get you connected to Wi-Fi. So we had all these tools. It was what we were focused on from 2000 probably to 2007 when we started, bought a bunch of companies to build networks. It was all about how do you get people connected to Wi-Fi. And so we built all these tools. We still run a lot of those ex-Coco strips and whisper scripts today in our app. So we have these mechanisms. The challenge is you got to get people to download the app. We actually, if you remember the old days of Skype used our APIs and used our code for you to automatically have your Skype Wi-Fi app connect to Wi-Fi. It was our code. So we've done those things in the past. It was just not as seamless, right? As a device just going, hey, I see a network and I'm going to connect to it because it's a trusted network. And that's where Passpoint came in. So So yeah, we've seen it. When I look at those things, we went from, like I said, it was like 9, 10% or something like that connections through the captive portal, probably had 3 or 4% through these apps, but it's just trying to get them to download those apps. When I look at what Speed Test has done, we used to go around. I remember I was back in the day, I was trying to get Speed Test and all the other app guys. I was trying to just say, hey, put my code in your app to automatically connect to Wi-Fi. So we had a whole sales team that was focused on trying to get inside apps to put our connection software. And so that's kind of the past and what we kind of did. So we have done that. We've simplified the web portal pages. You've seen we've got about an advertising solution from Google back in 2014, called Cloud9 that we still run. It's all where you see all the ads at the airport, where it will show you an ad and it's one click and get on. But we do that. And that helps people get on as well because instead of just one clicking in, it lets me tell them information before they get on. And because you're watching the ad, back in the day, the cookies were all back and forth, so I could gather the information that I needed to make sure your experience was good. But those are some of the tricks we've done in the past. I would just say nothing like the best thing we've done is PassPoint. Some of the last thing is some of the stadiums have apps, and we're utilizing that software in some of the stadiums. So they're trying to say use our app to get into the stadium. And so we're putting PassPoint and we're putting some of our connection logic inside the apps, and that's helping for some of the stadiums when you have people who are going to games consistently. But it's that person who decides to go just one time, it's a little bit harder.
Yeah, I've seen similar experiences at stadiums. It's getting the users, motivating them to install and download that app. Once you have the app, you can install the profiles to connect to the Wi-Fi network. So some stadiums have offered download our app, get a free drink on the house, one-time event, but just download our app and get that Wi-Fi profile installed. Obviously, we don't promote the Wi-Fi profile being installed bit, but we promote download the app, all the resources you'll have within the app, and here's a free drink on the house. But yeah, the more users that can download the app, the better. But to your point, it helps with repeat visitors. It's those one-time visitors that present a challenge. And PassPoint certainly offers a great path forward to facilitate that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay, I think we had one more slide, and I think it's just Q&A. So let's have anybody else have thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I had a question, perhaps just quickly, Derek, around like kind of expectations now for enterprise when it comes to connectivity. Do you find it's slightly different now to what it was going back maybe a few years ago?
So, the venues are getting involved. It used to be the venues would say, hey, I want to check from the carriers, or come in and, you'd have to pay. Like even at the beginning in 2000, the airports didn't pay for the Wi-Fi. We paid for it. Boingo paid for the Wi-Fi. We covered it with the DAS if we could, and if not, then we tried to charge you $49.95 at the beginning to be able to connect to the airport Wi-Fi, if you remember back those days. So they're willing to pay because they recognize it's a service that they have to have, and I think that's what's changed when I think about venues today. The CIOs, in a lot of these venues still don't understand networking, and so there's a education going on, but they know that they need it. They're like going, I need power in here, I need air conditioning, I need, that, but I also need connectivity. So that's what's changed a lot, is that they know that they need it. There's still a lot of education going on because they think, okay, I just can, have a tower beam in from outside and it's going to solve my connectivity issues. I think they're recognizing that doesn't work, so they've got to have a different type of mindset. And with the beauty of Wi-Fi, I think, if we can figure out the connectivity thing, PassPoint is available in all of our locations, but it's still not out everywhere, or open roaming. And I think we really just need all of us to focus in on that. We do that. With 1200 megahertz of spectrum, it's going to end up being a really good solution. But you know, the federation that the WBA is creating to make that work is still, you know, it's moving along, but it's slow, and we just got to speed that up.
I have a question for you, Derek. And by the way, some great insight that you're sharing, great perspective. But for some of those venues where you have a mix of technology such as Wi-Fi, private 5G, DAS, how do you go about determining the right mix across those different types of technologies?
It's really use case, Dale. You know, I look at the use cases, and so we try to figure out what they're trying to do. You know, the airport, when you think about that, it's a little mini city. It's kind of easy to kind of think through those use cases to kind of come up with a solution. When you're doing with like an office building, it changes a little bit, right? You look at the cellular and you go, I can put in a really, you know, good Wi-Fi solution here, and I've got tons of spectrum to be able to give to them, but they still want a little bit of cellular coverage. So we put in a cheaper DAS. So we basically use like eFemto cells to be able to feed a cheap DAS solution like an ADRF or something. And so then you're focusing in on coverage only for cellular, and you're focused on capacity with Wi-Fi, right? In that kind of a situation. And then for operational staff, you know, inside the building, you might end up saying, you know what, I can, since I'm already putting in a coverage type of DAS solution, I can put in a capacity, a small capacity, but a capacity private 5G for operational things, cameras, elevators, IoT devices that I want to be more secure and not be bothered by the high capacity Wi-Fi that I want to give to my tenants, for example. So you kind of think through those kind of scenarios. And the nice thing is, you know, you don't need to make them all for capacity. You figure out what the right design is for capacity and coverage based on the different technologies and use cases in the venue. So it's really dependent, very, very dependent. And that's those conversations you're having to understand the building. And so we don't go into a new vertical without thinking through it. I spent 2 years looking at hospitals before I said, okay, we're ready to go after hospitals, trying to talk to CIOs to understand what they need.
Got it. And that's a perfect leeway to the next question. You know, I heard you mention that, you know, you don't go into it without thinking it through. Now, how do you go about future-proofing wireless networks in such a fast evolving tech landscape?
Yeah, you know, I'm looking forward to Optilan. I don't know if you guys have looked at that, but you know, this optical LAN feeding into a Wi-Fi access point, you know, and so you have fiber all the way to the edge, right? I think that's kind of cool stuff. So you've got to realize that it's not just the access point, not just the antenna, but it's all the stuff leading up to it. So that's how I've been looking at future proof is the infrastructure side, making sure I have a good sized data room, making sure I got power in there, making sure I've got the right channels going through, and then recognizing that I'm going to have to switch out some of those nodes at the end. So that's kind of what we've done. We've been expecting Wi-Fi 7 to come out for a while, for the last 2 years. We've gone through all of our military bases and started upgrading all the switches and all the fiber and all that, adding fiber where we can, switching from 5, you know, Ethernet 5 to 6 and 6A and stuff. Going through and doing those kind of infrastructure upgrades is key. And I think fiber as a replacement is going to be really key too. Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying there too on the thing of mesh is key to that solution as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Derek. We are pretty much at time now. So just before we quickly wrap up, if any of you are going to be at Cisco Live in the near future, Ekahau and Ookla, we have a booth there. So do feel free to pop by and say hello and talk to us about all things connectivity. And the next webinar that will be coming up in a few weeks' time is going to be all about the different heat maps that you can see inside of our Ekahau applications. And we're going to be breaking it down exactly what it means when you see the different thresholds, and maybe a little bit of behind the curtain science of what our developers do to generate and show you those heat maps. But I just want to say a massive thank you to Derek for sharing your time today and your invaluable insights with our audience. I know how excited everybody was from Wi-Fi Day, so it's been great to be able to bring you back. And the co-partnership we've had working together recently has been really great. Personally, I've enjoyed working with you guys so much. So yeah, thank you for today.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Walt.
Well, yeah. All right, everybody. Hope you have a nice rest of your day, and we will look forward to seeing you all on the next webinar.